Hey you guys, welcome back. And today we're talking about wages and housing affordability, and just life affordability in general here in the United States. So since the 1950s, our minimum wage actually hasn't changed that much. And you might be like, well, how can that be? We make way more than we were making back then. Well, once you adjust for inflation and other market factors, the dollar that people were making back in the 1950s actually equates to $9 today, which means the $7.25 national minimum wage is actually less than people were making in the 1950s, which is insane, which just shows you that companies have gotten greedier and greedier in not wanting to pay their employees. And it ends up affecting the people who need the money the most, your working class citizens, the people who just want to build a life, who maybe want to start a business but need proper housing, and they can't afford housing because their minimum wage is too low and rent is too high, or a mortgage is too expensive. So if you're lucky, right, you might live in a state like California, or your job might do a higher than the national average minimum wage. And I believe a lot of companies do this. I work here in California, so my minimum wage is $16 an hour, plus I make tips. So by the end of the day, with my tips, my tip share, the money I'm taking home, once you calculate, you're making more like $40 or $50 an hour, which is really good, way better than expected. But even with the extra pay from tips, having to work a lot to pay my bills, and it is because I live in a city, and people might say, well, don't live in an urban area. But everything is getting more and more urbanized, and more people are moving to cities. So how are we going to make it affordable for even someone working a lot to afford to live in a place like California, New York, Chicago, any of the big cities that people might want to live in? And a lot of the reasons why rent is expensive, right here in California, I am renting a 2-bedroom, 2.5 bath with 3 other people. So our rent's $791 each, and our total rent is $2,375, which isn't cheap, right? You could maybe mortgage a house cheaper than that and own it. I see videos and I see things like in New York where someone's living in a 65 square foot apartment paying $600 a month, and we're normalizing this small living, like, oh yeah, live in a small space, hustle, and then get your money, or live in a van. And the reason I feel like media and people are normalizing this is the fact that the dream of owning a home, if you are working a regular job, right, whether you're a sales associate at, a Nordstrom, or you're a server at a diner, or a restaurant, or a high-end restaurant, the idea of owning a home, especially if you live in an urban area, is getting further and further away. And a lot of this has to do with some crazy bureaucratic stuff with zoning laws, right? It's extremely hard to get multi-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and multi-level homes. So certain buildings, certain zoning in LA and San Francisco doesn't let you build above a certain height, won't let you build larger than single-family homes because they believe it will affect the property value of their neighborhood if apartment buildings start popping up, or duplexes and triplexes. So this is what's made the housing market insanely expensive, and rent even more so, which sucks because people need a place to live, but their minimum wage jobs aren't matching the level of money they need to pay rent or mortgage a home, because we just don't have enough homes for people because of stupid zoning laws. So all of this ends up tying into each other. Let's dive into more detail because I'm giving a little bit of a broad overview. First, we're tackling wages directly. So let's circle back around to that 1950s $1 an hour, right? That equates to $9 an hour now, which is higher than the national minimum wage. Insane. And the reason minimum wage has really stagnated is because our minimum wage doesn't go based on our productivity. The average worker's productivity has skyrocketed, I think 90 or 70%, like hugely. But our pay increase, once you adjust for inflation since the 1970s, has actually only risen 13 cents. So you might be getting paid $16 an hour, but really when minimum wage was $3 in the 70s, you're only making 13 cents more. So in all actuality, adjusting for inflation and market cost, you're making $3.13 an hour, which is insane. And this is why I think a lot of people have to work 2 jobs and all these things. And I really believe you shouldn't be punished for working a minimum wage job, right? We need service industry jobs, we need minimum wage jobs so that people can have a job that's part-time and work their way through college, or build their business, or do what they need to do. But if you don't pay people enough money to work these jobs, well, number one, who's gonna work them? But how are they supposed to live? You shouldn't be struggling to pay rent or if you have a medical emergency, you shouldn't be worried that you might be on the street because your job isn't paying you enough and the housing market is so crazy that you can't afford to live anywhere. And I feel like that is what we are heading towards, and I think this is why it's such an important thing to talk about. Productivity and pay hasn't matched for the working class, but for the CEOs, it's gone up astronomically. Within the same amount of time since the 70s, while our productivity as the working class has gone up, the pay of the CEO has also gone up by 230%, and maybe even more, depending on what statistics you're looking at. That is insane. So you have your average worker who is barely seeing any money added to their base pay while being more productive than ever before, yet they aren't seeing any of that money. But guess who is seeing that money? The guy at the top, your CEO or your shareholders. Now, I'm a big believer in investing, diversifying, and I think it's awesome that we have so much more accessibility to it through cool platforms like Robinhood or Webull or whatever you use, right? But the fact is, we personally, unless we move as a collective or as a group, aren't gonna have a huge impact on the market. Big corporations like BlackRock and investing firms have way more power over companies and corporations, and they're the ones that are making all the money off of our hard work and labor. And in what world is it right that the people doing the work, right, get paid barely anything, or have to work on a tips system where they have to basically rely on the generosity of the people they are serving? Thankfully, a decent amount of people know how to tip. Some don't, but it ends up evening out and you end up making some money. So kudos to those people and thank you so much, because that's how I pay my rent. In fact, if I was not working a job that paid me in tips, I would probably have to be working way more at a minimum wage job or maybe a more hard labor job like in a factory. But I'm very happy that I can bartend and serve and make the money I do, and I love interacting with people. But corporations should not rely on the generosity of their customers to pay their employees, literally, wages. Because if people didn't tip, I would not be paying rent. So what we see is a large amount of people in the top 1%, the owners of these companies, reaping the benefits of their workers. And while I do believe in an entrepreneurial mindset of being like, hey, I built something, I think maybe I should get a little more of the piece of the pie, you shouldn't be taking so much of the pie that there's barely anything left for your people. And this is sadly how the capitalist system works. You pay your minimum wage workers just enough to get by, barely enough to get by, so that you can extract as much profit and as much productivity from them, so you can basically fatten your paycheck and the paychecks of your investors and the bottom line of your company, instead of treating your employees right. And a big risk I see in minimum wage not paying people enough and housing affordability is, how will people pay their way through college to get higher paying jobs or have enough time to educate themselves or work on something that makes them passionate? If you're working 3 jobs or 2 jobs a lot just trying to pay rent, when are you going to have time to express your own hobbies and try to be something more than you currently are, right? If you want to express yourself, become an artist, or build a business, well, how are you going to find time for that if all you're doing is working for this massive corporation that barely pays you enough to live, or working for multiple corporations because the one doesn't pay you enough? And it can become a vicious cycle where your dreams slip further and further away. And I do believe this is kind of the goal of the ruling class, because they do not want an educated and powerful proletariat or working class. And so I see this as a very dangerous threat to us actually getting more and more skilled workers into the fields we need them, right? We're going to have a crisis and a shortage of doctors and engineers and people that we need because no one can afford to get the schooling for it or afford to live and get the schooling for it, right? And hopefully, something like free education or student loan forgiveness, and in California, community colleges aren't as expensive as I once thought after just doing a little bit of research, and I want to dive into that more. But looking at something like a degree or a doctorate's degree or a master's, or if you're going into a field like neuroscience or something like that, you are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for a medical degree, and that's insane. And hopefully you're going to be able to pay that off, but what if a financial crisis happens? What if there is a recession or something else happens? Your life is going to be a lot harder, and then you're already being trampled down by predatory student loans. So it very much makes you feel like the system is against you. And how do we remain hopeful in this? How do we combat these bad practices by large corporations. So one thing workers can do is unionize or go on strike against employers. And this is happening more and more again against companies like Starbucks and Amazon wanting their employer to pay them more money and give them better benefits and all of these things. This is great to see because union rates of people joining have been declining, but now seeing the rise of new unions against companies like Starbucks and Amazon is very hopeful because union workers on average earn 10% more than non-union workers. That 10% more could literally help you deal with the inflation we're going through right now. We have an 8% inflation hike here in the US, and getting paid 10% more would literally offset that plus 2% more, which is like amazing, right? So unionization needs to become a big thing. We need to organize as workers, and when we see bad practices from our corporations, we need to, in a way, push them to do better. This happened during COVID somewhat when workers were not coming back to a lot of service industry jobs. So guess what? They started to put out pay increases to get either old employees or new employees to come in. They're like, hey, we will pay you more. We will do this because we need people to serve food. We need people to do this. We need people to deliver packages or whatever. But especially in the service industry, we did see some hikes in money. My sister works at a job and they literally said the same thing happened at their job, where during COVID they hired on people, or after COVID, or in the midst of the recovery, they hired people on and were like, hey, you know, we're gonna pay you 16 an hour instead of 14 or whatever, which people had not seen before. But because they were such a shortage of workers, they had to do something, and people were like, hey, I'm not coming back until I'm paid more, because everyone got to realize, like, oh, there are different ways to do things and I deserve better. The working class deserves more than it is getting. So I truly believe that humans are capable of doing anything, right? I think if you work hard and you do a lot of stuff and you're hopeful and optimistic and you put the time in, you can achieve a lot. But I also believe having a helping community and a government that is not trying to literally fuck you up the ass with all this extra stuff you have to pay for would help you achieve your dreams faster and with a whole lot less stress. And I also truly believe if someone doesn't want to create their own business or doesn't want to become the next, you know, Elon Musk or any of these entrepreneurs or actors, let's say your dream is just to be a fry cook, or you like your job as a package delivery person, you enjoy driving around, whatever you do, you should not be punished for working a minimum wage job. And the fact is people who are providing daily services, serving, package delivery, factory work, all of these people are getting paid barely enough to live. And without them, if every one of us just stopped, if none of us went to work tomorrow, guess what? The world would stop working. And we have to realize that the power we have is in our numbers and in uniting against these large corporations. If there are mass strikes until things are remedied, yeah, supply chains might stop, people might get upset, but it'll be for the greater good of everybody. And we have to realize that our power is in unity and in coming together to be like, hey, this is enough and we deserve more. Because it is time for us to stand up against these large corporations and what they're doing and how they're taking advantage of the middle class and the working class. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I truly believe through uniting and finding a better way forward, we can change the world. If we can just get zoning down, if we can just maybe raise minimum wage a little bit and make housing more affordable, the amount of stress that would decrease on everybody, and myself included, because I am learning about adulthood as I go on. I'm 23 and I'm like, holy shit, there's a lot of stuff I gotta do. But I truly believe that things shouldn't be as hard as they are, and you should not be punished for working a job that is minimum wage, right? There's no shame in serving and being a fast food worker or any of that, and you should not be punished fiscally for choosing that job while you're trying to follow your dreams or get started on your life. So yeah, let me know what you all think. Together, if we unite against these powers that be and just show them that, hey, we're not going to do what you want us to do until you treat us more fairly, then I truly believe we can make a better world. And we, as the people, must, with kindness, with love, and with understanding, unite together, put aside our differences, and demand more from our leaders, more for us and more for the betterment of our entire planet. I love you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I cannot wait to talk to you next time. Peace.